Imagine waking up in what seems like the perfect life, a luxurious mansion, a loving husband, and a baby on the way. But what if one small bruise reveals a nightmare of hidden cameras, relentless surveillance, and a deadly plan unfolding right under your roof today? Dive into The Bruise That Changed Everything, the heart-pounding story of Sarah Matthews, a pregnant woman fighting for her freedom against a husband who's mastered the art of control. As secrets unravel and danger closes in, you'll be on the edge of your seat wondering, can she escape before it's too late? Stick around to the end for this empowering tale of survival. You won't believe how it twists. If this hook has you intrigued, smash that like button to show your support. Drop a comment below with what you do in Sarah's shoes. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and hit subscribe with notifications on so you never miss another gripping story like this. Let's get into it. Sarah Matthews adjusted the silk emerald dress that perfectly complemented her 6-month pregnant silhouette as she surveyed their sprawling living room. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over designer furniture, and the panoramic windows showcased the Seattle skyline like a painting. Everything looked perfect for tonight's dinner party, celebrating Marcus's latest tech acquisition deal. At 38, Sarah had achieved what many would consider the American dream. Her architectural firm had designed some of the city's most prestigious buildings, and her marriage to Marcus Chen, the millionaire tech mogul, seemed like a fairy tale. Their $3 million mansion in Bellevue served as the backdrop for their picture-perfect life, complete with a nursery she had lovingly designed for their unborn daughter. "Sarah, darling, you look radiant," called Victoria Pemberton, the mayor's wife. As guests began arriving, Sarah smiled graciously, though she felt anything but radiant. The pregnancy had been harder than expected, with mysterious fatigue that her doctor couldn't explain, and a growing sense of unease she couldn't shake. Marcus appeared at her side, his hand possessively settling on the small of her back. "My beautiful wife," he murmured, loud enough for their guests to hear. "Always the perfect hostess." His fingers pressed slightly too hard, a subtle reminder of his control that only she would notice. The evening progressed smoothly as Seattle's elite mingled in their home. Sarah found herself in conversation with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a prominent psychiatrist who had become a friend through their charity work with women's shelters. As fate would have it, Sarah's current project involved designing a new safe house for domestic abuse survivors, a cause close to her heart for reasons she couldn't fully articulate. "Your design for the Harmony House shelter is revolutionary," Dr. Walsh said, sipping her wine. "The way you've incorporated multiple exit routes and hidden safe rooms shows real understanding of trauma-informed architecture." Sarah felt a flush of pride. "I believe spaces should heal, not harm. Every woman deserves to feel safe in her own home." The irony of her words would only become clear later. As the evening wound down, Marcus regaled their remaining guests with stories of his latest business conquests. He gestured expansively while describing how he had outmaneuvered competitors, his shoulder moving in wide arcs. Sarah had learned to stay alert during these performances. But tonight, distracted by a conversation about her latest architectural project, she stepped closer to refill the wine glasses. The collision happened in slow motion. Marcus's shoulder, mid-gesture, connected solidly with Sarah's side. The force, combined with her changed center of gravity from pregnancy, sent her stumbling backward. Several guests gasped as she caught herself against the marble-top side table, the wine glasses clattering to the floor. "Oh my goodness, Sarah!" Victoria rushed forward. "Are you all right, dear?" Marcus was immediately by her side, his face a mask of concern that looked genuine to everyone else. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. You know how clumsy I get when I'm excited about business." He helped her upright, his grip firm on her arm. "The pregnancy makes everything more challenging, doesn't it?" The guests laughed sympathetically, offering the usual comments about pregnancy clumsiness and how protective husbands could be. Dr. Walsh frowned slightly but said nothing. Sarah forced a smile, brushing off their concerns while internally cataloging the sharp pain in her ribs where Marcus's shoulder had connected. "Just tired," she assured everyone. The baby's been keeping me up nights with all her kicking. After the guests departed, Sarah retreated to their master bathroom to change. The emerald dress had a small wine stain from her stumble, but as she slipped it off, she noticed something more concerning. A dark bruise was already forming along her ribcage, angry purple against her pale skin. She stared at her reflection, trying to remember exactly how Marcus's shoulder had hit her. It had felt deliberate, but surely that was just her imagination. Pregnancy hormones could make anyone paranoid, couldn't they? As she examined the bruise more closely, something in the bathroom mirror caught her eye. The overhead light fixture, an ornate crystal piece Marcus had insisted on, had a tiny reflection that seemed out of place. She stepped closer, studying the small glass bulb that didn't match the others. Her heart began to pound as the realization dawned. That wasn't a light bulb at all. The tiny object embedded among the crystals looked remarkably like a camera lens. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, then stopped. If she was right about what she was seeing, who knew what else Marcus might have access to? She forced herself to appear normal, finishing her nighttime routine as if nothing had happened, all while her mind raced with terrifying possibilities. When she finally slipped into bed beside her sleeping husband, Sarah's world had already begun to crumble. The perfect life she thought she knew was nothing more than an elaborate performance, and she was both the star and the unwitting victim. As she lay in the darkness, one hand protectively covering her belly, Sarah began to understand that the bruise on her ribs was just the beginning. Tomorrow, she would start looking for more cameras. Something told her she would find them. The question that kept her awake until dawn was simple but terrifying. How long had Marcus been watching her every move? And what else had she missed in their seemingly perfect marriage? Sarah woke before dawn, her body aching from a restless night of tossing and turning. The bruise on her ribs had darkened overnight, a vivid reminder of the previous evening's accident, but it was the memory of that tiny camera lens that truly made her stomach churn. She slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake Marcus, and padded to the kitchen to start her morning routine. Everything looked normal in the pre-dawn light filtering through their floor-to-ceiling windows. The marble countertops gleamed. The stainless steel appliances stood ready for another day of domestic perfection. But now Sarah saw her home through different eyes. The smoke detector in the corner seemed positioned oddly high. The decorative plant on the bookshelf had small metallic elements she'd never noticed before. Even the elegant mirror in the hallway reflected light in ways that suddenly seemed suspicious. Her hands shook as she prepared her decaffeinated coffee, a morning ritual that had become sacred during her pregnancy. Marcus had been so attentive about her health, insisting on organic everything, monitoring her caffeine intake, even purchasing special prenatal vitamins from his private physician. How thoughtful, how controlling. "You're up early, sweetheart." Marcus's voice made her jump, coffee splashing onto the pristine counter. He appeared in the doorway wearing his perfectly pressed workout clothes, ready for his daily 5 a.m. run through the neighborhood. "The baby was restless," Sarah managed, forcing normalcy into her voice. "I thought some chamomile tea might help." Marcus moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders in what anyone else would interpret as a loving gesture. But Sarah felt the weight of surveillance in his touch. "How are you feeling after last night? I'm still mortified about that collision. David was telling such an amusing story about his ex-wife that I got completely carried away." His thumbs pressed slightly into the tense muscles of her neck. "You're not hurt, are you? Just a small bruise. Nothing serious." Sarah kept her voice light, though every instinct screamed danger. "I'm glad. We can't be too careful with our precious cargo." His hands moved to rest on her belly, the gesture possessive rather than protective. "I'll be back from my run in an hour. Why don't you rest a bit more, Dr. Morrison always says pregnant women need extra sleep." After Marcus left, Sarah stood frozen in the kitchen for several minutes, listening to the silence of their enormous house. Then, with determination born of desperation, she began her search. The living room yielded 3 hidden cameras disguised as decorative elements. The home office, where she occasionally worked on architectural projects, had 2 more, positioned to capture both her computer screen and her face. Her private study, the one room she'd thought was truly hers, contained 4 cameras with different angles. By the time she reached the nursery, Sarah's hands were visibly shaking. The room she'd designed with such love and hope had been violated with surveillance equipment. Tiny cameras were embedded in the mobile above the crib, in the decorative lamp, even in the changing table she'd carefully selected for functionality and beauty. The master bedroom was the worst. 7 cameras captured every angle, every private moment. Sarah sank onto the edge of their bed, the magnitude of her situation crushing down on her like a physical weight. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Jessica. "Still on for lunch today, can't wait to see how the nursery's coming along." Sarah stared at the message, then at the cameras surrounding her. How could she explain this to anyone? How could she even prove it? Marcus was beloved in their social circle, generous with charities, charming at parties. Who would believe that Seattle's favorite tech philanthropist was systematically surveilling his pregnant wife? She typed back, "Looking forward to it. Noon at Pike Place is planned." Before leaving to meet Jessica, Sarah made one more discovery that stopped her cold. Hidden in the basement behind Marcus's wine collection was a room she'd never seen before. The door was locked, but she could see through a small gap that it contained multiple monitors, all displaying live feeds from throughout their house. One screen showed her current location. Sarah backed away from the door, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure the cameras could pick up the sound. She had to get out of there before Marcus returned from his run. At Pike Place Market, the familiar chaos of vendors hawking fresh fish and tourists taking photos felt surreal after her morning of horrifying discoveries. Jessica waved from their usual table at the small cafe overlooking Elliott Bay, her face bright with excitement. "You look terrible," Jessica said immediately, her smile fading as Sarah approached. "Are you feeling all right? Is the baby okay?" Sarah slid into the chair across from her oldest friend, the woman who had been her maid of honor, who had thrown her baby shower, who had celebrated every milestone of her seemingly charmed life. "Jess, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise me you'll listen with an open mind." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Of course. What's wrong?" Sarah began carefully, describing the hidden cameras, the sense of being watched, the growing realization that her marriage was built on surveillance and control. Jessica's expression shifted from concern to disbelief to horror as the story unfolded. "Sarah, honey, are you sure you're not just stressed? Pregnancy can make you paranoid sometimes. Marcus loves you so much, and he's always been protective." "Protective or controlling?" Sarah interrupted, then immediately regretted her sharp tone. This was exactly the reaction she'd feared. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to dismiss your feelings. It's just that Marcus has always seemed so devoted. Remember when you had that stomach bug last month and he insisted on working from home to take care of you? And the way he lights up when he talks about the baby?" Sarah remembered that week differently now. Marcus hovering, monitoring her every move, insisting she stay in bed where the bedroom cameras could track her constantly. She'd thought it was love. Now she recognized it as surveillance. "Jessica, I know how this sounds, but I need you to—" "Sarah, what a pleasant surprise." Both women turned to see Marcus approaching their table, his running clothes replaced by a casual business outfit. His smile was warm and genuine, the picture of a devoted husband checking on his pregnant wife. "Marcus," Sarah managed, "I thought you were in meetings all afternoon." "Canceled when I realized it was such a beautiful day. I was hoping to surprise you for lunch, but I see Jessica beat me to it." He leaned down to kiss Sarah's cheek, his hand possessively covering hers on the table. "How are you feeling, sweetheart? You seem tired this morning." The conversation continued pleasantly, Marcus charming Jessica, as he always did, sharing amusing anecdotes about his latest business ventures and asking about her new marketing job. To any observer, they looked like the perfect couple enjoying lunch with a dear friend. But Sarah noticed things she'd missed before. How Marcus positioned himself to see both her face and her phone screen. How he subtly steered the conversation away whenever Jessica asked Sarah direct questions. how his grip on her hand tightened whenever she started to speak freely. When Jessica excused herself to use the restroom, Marcus's entire demeanor shifted. The warm smile remained, but his eyes went cold. "Interesting conversation you two were having when I arrived," he said quietly. "Something about feeling watched." Sarah's blood turned to ice. There was no way he could have heard their whispered conversation from across the crowded restaurant, unless, "Your pregnancy hormones are really affecting your judgment, aren't they? Darling, maybe we should increase those vitamin supplements Dr. Morrison prescribed. Make sure you're getting everything you need for optimal mental health." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah forced herself to nod and smile as Jessica returned to the table, chattering about the restaurant's new menu items. When they finally parted ways, Jessica hugged Sarah tightly. "I'm here for you," she whispered. "Whatever you need." But as Sarah watched her best friend walk away, she realized with devastating clarity that there was no one who could help her. Marcus had too much money, too much influence, too much control, and now he knew she was starting to figure it out. That evening, as Sarah pretended to read architectural magazines in their living room, she became aware of Marcus watching her more intently than usual. Every page she turned, every shift in position, every glance toward the windows seemed to register in his calculating gaze. "I was thinking," he said suddenly, looking up from his tablet, "maybe we should move your due date up with Dr. Morrison. I've been reading about the benefits of induced labor for women over 35. Safer for both mother and baby." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to protect her belly. "But Dr. Morrison said I'm healthy. The baby isn't due for another 3 months." "Of course, darling. I just want what's best for our family." Marcus's smile was perfectly calibrated, but Sarah finally recognized it for what it was, the expression of a predator who had cornered her prey. As she lay in bed that night, pretending to sleep while Marcus's breathing settled into its familiar rhythm, Sarah realized she was no longer just fighting for her own freedom. She was fighting for her daughter's life, and tomorrow she would have to figure out how to escape a prison disguised as paradise, all while knowing that every move she made was being recorded by the man lying next to her. Sarah spent the following days in a state of heightened awareness that left her exhausted and paranoid. Every conversation with Marcus felt like a chess match where she was perpetually in check. Every mundane activity, from grocery shopping to checking email, carried the weight of surveillance. She began testing the boundaries of her digital prison. When she tried to log into her business bank account from her home computer, she discovered the password had been changed. Her phone showed no unusual apps, but calls seemed to echo strangely, and her text messages to certain contacts went undelivered. The most chilling discovery came when she contacted her architectural firm's largest client about an upcoming project meeting. Margaret Sullivan, the CEO of a nonprofit foundation, sounded confused and slightly cold on the phone. "Sarah, I'm sorry, but we've decided to go with Davidson Architecture for the Women's Shelter Project. I thought Marcus spoke with you about our decision last week." Sarah's hands went numb. The women's shelter had been her passion project, a year in development. She had never spoken to Marcus about any problems with the contract. "I'm sorry, Margaret, but I think there's been some confusion. Could you tell me exactly what happened?" "Well, Marcus called to discuss some concerns about your ability to handle such a large project given your pregnancy and, well, frankly, some questions about your recent reliability. He was very understanding. Of course, and recommended Davidson himself. He said you'd been having some health issues that might affect your work quality." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her home office staring at her computer screen, the weight of her situation finally becoming clear. Marcus wasn't just watching her. He was systematically dismantling her professional life, her financial independence, her connections to the outside world. She opened her laptop and began researching domestic surveillance laws, quickly realizing the legal complexity of her situation. Washington state had strict privacy laws, but they became murky when applied to spouses sharing a residence. Many of the cameras were in common areas where Marcus had every legal right to be. Her internet searches led her down increasingly dark rabbit holes. Articles about digital domestic abuse, Stories of women trapped by tech-savvy partners who use surveillance to maintain control. Support forums where survivors shared tales that mirrored her own experience with terrifying precision. Sarah. Marcus's voice from the doorway made her slam the laptop shut. What are you researching so intently? Baby cribs, she lied smoothly. I found some eco-friendly options that might work better for the nursery. Marcus crossed the room and opened her laptop before she could protest. The search history showed her attempts to clear the browser, but any tech expert would know how to recover deleted data. Interesting research topics, he said mildly, scrolling through the cached pages about surveillance laws. Is there something bothering you, sweetheart? The moment stretched between them like a taut wire. Sarah realized this was her chance to confront him directly or continue the pretense that might buy her more time to plan. I've been feeling watched lately, she said carefully. Maybe it's just pregnancy paranoia, but I keep thinking someone is monitoring me. Marcus's expression shifted to one of concerned understanding. Darling, that's not paranoia. That's my security system. I should have explained it better when we moved in. He sat on the edge of her desk, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. Given my profile in the tech industry, we have to take precautions. Corporate espionage is a real threat. Security cameras in our bedroom, Sarah challenged. The most secure systems are comprehensive. I know it feels invasive, but it's for our protection, especially now, with the baby coming. His hand reached out to touch her face in what looked like a tender gesture. I would die if anything happened to you or our daughter. The explanation was so reasonable, so logical, that Sarah almost convinced herself to believe it. Almost. I'd feel more comfortable if you showed me how the system works, she said, so I understand what's being recorded and who has access. For just a moment, Marcus's mask slipped. She saw calculation behind his eyes, the rapid assessment of how much truth he could safely share. Of course, darling, though I should mention that David has been helping me manage the more technical aspects. He's actually the one who recommended the current setup. David Morrison had been Marcus's business partner for over a decade, a charming man Sarah had always liked. The revelation that he was involved in her surveillance felt like another betrayal. That afternoon, while Marcus was in back-to-back meetings, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She called the law office of Elena Rodriguez, an attorney who specialized in family law and had spoken at several charity events Sarah had attended. The initial consultation was scheduled for the following week, but Sarah convinced Elena's secretary that she had an urgent situation requiring immediate attention. They agreed to meet at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle, away from both Sarah's neighborhood and her usual haunts. Elena Rodriguez was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps early 30s, with sharp intelligence in her dark eyes and a no-nonsense manner that was immediately reassuring. Mrs. Matthews, you sounded distressed on the phone. How can I help you? Sarah chose her words carefully, describing the hidden cameras, the canceled contracts, the growing sense of being trapped. Elena listened without interruption, taking notes and asking pointed questions about Marcus's behavior, their financial arrangements, and Sarah's access to resources. The surveillance issue is complicated legally, Elena explained. Washington is a two-party consent state for recordings, but there are exceptions for homeowners on their own property. However, the pattern you're describing suggests something more systematic than standard home security. What would you need to build a case, evidence, documentation, witnesses who can testify to changes in your husband's behavior or attempts to isolate you? Elena leaned forward. But I have to ask, Mrs. Matthews, are you in immediate physical danger? Sarah thought of the bruise on her ribs, now faded to a yellowish shadow. I don't think so. He's never been violent before. Abuse escalates, Elena said gently, and pregnancy can be a trigger for increased controlling behavior. If you feel unsafe, we can discuss emergency protective orders. They spent another hour going over Sarah's options, from documenting the surveillance to establishing independent financial resources. Elena gave her several business cards for safe houses and domestic abuse hotlines, along with a prepaid cell phone for emergencies. "Call me if anything changes," Elena said as they prepared to leave. "And Mrs. Matthews, trust your instincts. They're usually right." Sarah was walking back to her car when her regular phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Hope your doctor's appointment went well. See you at home for dinner? Love you." She had never mentioned a doctor's appointment. Her blood ran cold as she realized Marcus had been tracking her location, probably monitoring her regular phone, possibly even listening to her conversation with Elena. When she arrived home, Marcus was in the kitchen preparing what looked like a romantic dinner. Candles were lit, wine was breathing on the counter, and soft jazz played from the hidden speakers throughout their house. "How did your appointment go?" he asked casually, not looking up from the salmon he was seasoning. "Fine. Just routine pregnancy checkup." Sarah forced herself to sound normal while her mind raced. How much did he know? "Good. I worry about you driving so far for medical appointments. Dr. Morrison has excellent recommendations for obstetricians closer to home if you'd prefer." The message was clear. He knew she hadn't been to see her regular doctor. He knew exactly where she'd been and probably whom she'd met with. "Marcus," she said carefully, "I think we need to talk about David's involvement in our security system." He finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "What about it?" "I'd like to meet with him, understand better how everything works." Marcus set down the seasoning and moved toward her, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Sweetheart, I think you're working yourself up unnecessarily. David's been nothing but helpful." "Then you won't mind if I speak with him directly?" "Of course not." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "In fact, why don't I invite him over this weekend? We can all discuss the security arrangements together." That night, as Sarah lay in bed pretending to sleep, she heard Marcus moving around downstairs. The soft click of a door, muffled conversation, the sound of someone else's voice responding to his. David was already there. And tomorrow, Sarah realized with growing horror, she would discover just how deep the web of surveillance and control really went. Sarah woke Saturday morning to the smell of coffee and bacon wafting from the kitchen, along with the sound of masculine laughter. Marcus and David were already deep in conversation, their voices carrying the easy familiarity of old friends discussing business. She dressed carefully, choosing clothes that concealed the new bruises that had appeared on her arms, finger-shaped marks that Marcus claimed were from steadying her when she'd stumbled on the stairs 2 nights before. Another accident, another explanation that sounded reasonable to anyone who wasn't living it. "There's our sleeping beauty," David called out cheerfully as Sarah entered the kitchen. He stood to give her a friendly hug, the same warm greeting he'd offered at dozens of dinner parties over the years. "Marcus tells me you've been asking about our security setup. Smart thinking, especially with the little one coming." David Morrison was everything Marcus wasn't tall where Marcus was compact, blonde where Marcus was dark, openly emotional where Marcus was controlled. They complemented each other perfectly in business, and Sarah had always enjoyed David's company at social events. Now she studied him with new eyes, looking for signs of the conspiracy Marcus had revealed. "I appreciate you taking the time to explain everything," Sarah said carefully. "I've been feeling a bit overwhelmed by all the technology in the house." "Completely understandable. Marcus can get a bit carried away with gadgets." David winked conspiratorially. "Remember when he wanted to automate the toilet seats?" The easy banter continued through breakfast, David explaining the security system with patience and technical expertise. Motion sensors, door alarms, perimeter monitoring. It all sounded reasonable and protective rather than invasive. It was only when Sarah asked about the cameras in private areas that David's demeanor shifted slightly. "Well, those are really more Marcus's department. The bedroom monitoring is primarily for medical reasons, isn't it?" Marcus, given Sarah's pregnancy complications? Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What pregnancy complications?" The two men exchanged a look that lasted perhaps half a second too long. "Nothing serious, darling," Marcus said smoothly. "Just the fatigue you've been experiencing. Dr. Morrison thought it might be helpful to monitor your sleep patterns. Make sure you're getting proper rest. Dr. Morrison suggested bedroom surveillance. Not surveillance. Medical monitoring. The cameras can track movement patterns, sleep disruption, signs of distress. David leaned forward earnestly. There are AI applications that can detect seizures, falls, even early signs of postpartum depression. Marcus wanted to be prepared. The explanation was so thoroughly reasonable, so scientifically sound, that Sarah almost believed it herself. Almost. I'd like to see the footage, she said suddenly, to understand what kind of data you're collecting. Another micro-expression passed between the men. Of course, Marcus said, though most of it is quite boring, hours of you sleeping peacefully. I'd still like to see it. David cleared his throat. Actually, Sarah, that might not be the best idea right now. Some of the recent recordings have been, well, let's just say your sleepwalking episodes have been concerning. Sarah's blood turned to ice. I don't sleepwalk. You've been getting up frequently during the night, Marcus said gently. Having conversations, sometimes seeming confused or disoriented. Dr. Morrison thinks it might be pregnancy-related anxiety manifesting as parasomnia. That's impossible. I would remember. That's the nature of sleepwalking, sweetheart. The person rarely remembers. Marcus reached across the table to squeeze her hand. It's why we've been so concerned about you driving alone, meeting with people when you're not fully yourself. The world tilted beneath Sarah's feet. Either she was losing her mind, or the two men she trusted most were gaslighting her with medical-sounding explanations that made her question her own reality. I want to see a different doctor, she said quietly. Of course, darling. But let's wait until after the baby comes. Changing medical care during pregnancy can be risky. After David left, promising to send Sarah some research articles about pregnancy-related sleep disorders, Sarah retreated to her study to process what she'd learned. But when she tried to access her computer, she discovered her password had been changed again. Marcus appeared in the doorway as if summoned by her frustration. Having trouble with your computer, David mentioned he updated the security protocols this morning. Here, let me help. He entered a new password, their wedding anniversary backwards, followed by her social security number. The casual violation of her privacy was presented as thoughtful tech support. Marcus, I need my independence back. I can't work if I don't have access to my own files. Sweetheart, you're 7 months pregnant. Maybe it's time to focus on preparing for motherhood instead of stressing about work. My work is important to me. Those women's shelters I designed could save lives. And they will, after the baby comes and you've had time to recover properly. Marcus sat on the arm of her chair, his body language casual but his presence oppressive. I've been thinking we should take that baby moon we talked about. Somewhere quiet and private where you can really rest. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Haven't heard from you in days. Everything okay? Before Sarah could respond, Marcus gently took the phone from her hands. Let me handle that. You shouldn't be stressing about social obligations right now. He typed a quick response. Doing great, just tired and focusing on baby prep. We'll call soon. Then he handed the phone back, and Sarah saw that her messaging app had been logged out. When she tried to log back in, she received an error message about account security. Maybe you should rest, Marcus suggested. All this technology can be overwhelming when you're not feeling your best. That afternoon, while Marcus was supposedly at the gym, Sarah tried calling Elena Rodriguez from the landline in the kitchen. The call went straight to voicemail, but when Sarah tried to leave a message, the line went dead. She tried calling Jessica's number, her sister in Portland, even her mother in San Francisco. Every call either failed to connect or was cut off after a few seconds. The house felt like it was closing in around her. She walked to the front door, intending to drive somewhere with cell service, only to discover her car keys were missing from their usual hook. Looking for these, Marcus appeared behind her, jingling her keys. I had to move your car for the landscapers. Didn't want to wake you. I wasn't asleep. I was in my study. Were you? You seemed pretty out of it when I checked on you. His concerned expression was perfect, loving, and absolutely terrifying. Maybe we should call Dr. Morrison about increasing your vitamin dosage. These memory lapses are concerning. Sarah stared at her husband, finally understanding the full scope of her imprisonment. He controlled her communications, her transportation, her access to the outside world. He was systematically making her question her own perceptions while positioning himself as her only reliable source of reality. And now he was talking about taking her somewhere quiet and private, where her isolation would be complete. I think I'll take that nap after all, she said quietly. Good idea, darling. I'll be in the basement working on some business calls. Try to get some real rest. As Marcus disappeared downstairs, Sarah realized she had perhaps one more chance to reach out for help before her window of opportunity closed completely. She remembered the prepaid phone Elena had given her, hidden in the bottom of her jewelry box. But when she went to retrieve it, the phone was gone. In its place was a note in Marcus's handwriting. Darling, found this strange phone in your jewelry box. I've disposed of it safely. These pregnancy hormones are really affecting your judgment. We'll get through this together. All my love, M. Sarah sank onto their bed, surrounded by cameras that recorded her every expression of despair, and realized that her husband hadn't just been watching her. He'd been planning her complete destruction, one carefully orchestrated step at a time, and now there was nowhere left to run. Sarah spent the next 3 days in a fog of carefully controlled desperation. Marcus had increased his attention, rarely leaving her alone for more than a few minutes. He brought her meals, monitored her medication intake, and suggested she spend most of her time resting in their bedroom where the cameras could keep her safe. It was during one of these enforced rest periods that Sarah felt the first real contraction. The pain gripped her abdomen like a vice, lasting nearly 30 seconds before releasing her with a gasp. At 7 months pregnant, this was far too early. Sarah pressed her hands to her belly, trying to determine if this was Braxton Hicks' practice labor or something more serious. When the second contraction hit 10 minutes later, she knew she needed medical attention immediately. Marcus, she called, her voice carrying the edge of panic that no amount of surveillance could create artificially. He appeared in the bedroom doorway within seconds, as if he'd been waiting just outside. What's wrong, sweetheart? I'm having contractions. Real ones. We need to get to the hospital. For a moment, Marcus stood perfectly still, and Sarah saw him calculating behind his eyes. The expression was gone so quickly she might have imagined it, replaced by appropriate husbandly concern. Are you sure, Dr. Morrison said Braxton Hicks' contractions are normal at this stage? Another contraction seized her, stronger than the previous two. Sarah doubled over, breathing hard through the pain. Marcus, this isn't Braxton Hicks. Something's wrong. Let me call Dr. Morrison first. Get his advice. No! Hospital! Now! Sarah struggled to her feet, one hand braced against the wall. I'm not taking chances with our daughter's life. The drive to Swedish Medical Center felt interminable. Marcus drove carefully, just below the speed limit, while Sarah timed contractions that were growing stronger and closer together. By the time they reached the emergency room, she was in active premature labor. The medical team moved with swift efficiency, whisking Sarah into a labor and delivery room while Marcus handled the paperwork. Within minutes, Sarah was hooked up to monitors tracking both her vital signs and the baby's heartbeat. Mrs. Matthews, I'm Elena Vasquez, your nurse practitioner today, said a woman with kind eyes and steady hands. Can you tell me about your contractions? When did they start? Sarah found herself studying Elena's face, looking for signs of judgment or disbelief. There was something about the woman's manner that seemed genuinely caring rather than professionally polite. About 2 hours ago, they're getting stronger and closer together. Any recent stress or trauma that might have triggered early labor? The question hung in the air like a lifeline. Sarah glanced toward the door where Marcus was visible through the glass, speaking intensely into his phone. Yes, there's been some stress at home. Elena followed Sarah's gaze, then moved to close the door and pull the privacy curtain. What kind of stress, Mrs. Matthews? Something in Elena's tone suggested she'd had this conversation before, with other women in similar situations. Sarah made a split-second decision that would change everything. I think my husband has been drugging me, and he's been watching me through hidden cameras in our house. Elena's expression didn't change, but she moved closer to Sarah's bedside. Have you told anyone else about this? I tried to contact a lawyer, but he found out. He's been monitoring my communications, canceling my work contracts, isolating me from friends and family. The words tumbled out in a whispered rush. I think he's planning to take me somewhere isolated after the baby is born. I'm terrified. Elena nodded slowly, then moved to Sarah's IV line. I'm going to give you something to stop the contractions, but first I need to run some blood tests. With your permission, I'd like to test for substances that shouldn't be in your system. Will Marcus find out? Not from me. Doctor-patient confidentiality applies to everything we discuss. Elena's voice was firm. But Mrs. Matthews, if you're in danger, we need to involve security and social services. He's too smart for that, too respected. Everyone thinks he's the perfect husband. Elena was quiet for a moment, reviewing Sarah's chart. Mrs. Matthews, did you know you've been in this hospital 3 times in the past 2 months? Emergency room visits for dizziness, nausea, and what your husband reported as confusion or disorientation. Sarah's blood went cold. I've never been here before today. According to your medical records, your husband brought you in for episodes where you seemed to be having memory problems or appeared to be under the influence of something. Each time, you were treated and released with recommendations for rest and prenatal psychiatric evaluation. The full scope of Marcus's manipulation was finally becoming clear. He'd been creating a medical history that would support his claims about her mental state, visits she couldn't remember because she'd been drugged. Elena, I need your help. I need someone to believe me. The nurse practitioner studied Sarah's face for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you, and I'm going to help you, but we have to be very careful. Elena administered medication to stop the contractions, then drew several vials of blood for testing. As they waited for the lab results, she shared her own story in whispered conversations between monitoring checks. Elena had escaped an abusive marriage 5 years earlier, one that had nearly cost her life. She'd since become an advocate for domestic abuse survivors, trained to recognize the signs that other medical professionals might miss. The pattern is always the same, Elena explained. Isolation, control of resources, gaslighting that makes you question your own reality. And they're always so charming to outsiders that no one believes the victim. When the lab results came back 2 hours later, they confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Her blood showed traces of benzodiazepines, anxiety medications that could cause memory loss and disorientation when given without the patient's knowledge. This is evidence, Elena said quietly, but we need more to build a case that will stand up in court. How he monitors everything I do. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a fitness tracker. This is a panic button disguised as a health monitor. If you're in immediate danger, press the center button 3 times quickly. It will send your location to a network of advocates and emergency services. She also provided Sarah with a business card for Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the psychiatrist Sarah knew from charity events. Jennifer specializes in domestic abuse cases. She can provide the psychological evaluation you'll need to counter whatever narrative your husband has been building. As Elena prepared to discharge Sarah with instructions for bed rest and follow-up care, she delivered one more crucial piece of information. Mrs. Matthews, this isn't your husband's first marriage. His previous wife, Amanda Chen, died in what was ruled an accidental drowning at their vacation home. But there were questions about the circumstances that were never fully investigated. Sarah's hands went numb. Marcus had told her his first wife died in a car accident. How do you know this? Because Amanda's sister contacted me last year. She's been investigating her death and believes Marcus was responsible. She's gathered evidence that could help your case. Elena handed Sarah a sealed envelope. Amanda's sister's contact information, but be very careful how you use it. If your husband discovers you've been in contact with her, the implication hung unfinished in the air. As Marcus helped Sarah into their car for the drive home, he was solicitous and concerned, asking detailed questions about her treatment and prognosis. The nurse seemed very thorough, he commented. Did she mention anything about the blood tests they ran? Just checking for infection, Sarah lied smoothly. Everything looked normal. Good, I was worried about those vitamin supplements Dr. Morrison prescribed. Sometimes reactions can be unpredictable during pregnancy. Sarah stared out the window as they drove through Seattle's familiar streets. Elena's panic button hidden beneath her maternity shirt and Amanda Chen's sister's contact information memorized and destroyed. For the first time in months, Sarah felt something that had been missing from her life hope. But she also understood with crystal clarity that Marcus's patience was running out. The failed attempt to take her somewhere isolated, combined with her medical emergency, had accelerated whatever timeline he'd been following. Whatever he was planning to do to her would happen soon. And now she finally understood that her life and her daughter's life quite literally depended on staying one step ahead of a man who had already killed once to protect his secrets. The days following Sarah's hospital visit were a careful dance of deception. Marcus's attention had intensified, but Sarah now recognized his hovering for what it was, the behavior of a predator, ensuring his prey couldn't escape. She played the part of the grateful, recovering patient, while secretly documenting everything. The panic button Elena had given her remained hidden beneath loose-fitting clothes, and Sarah had memorized the contact information for Amanda Chen's sister before destroying the paper. 3 days after her emergency room visit, while Marcus was in his basement office for what he claimed was an important international conference call, Sarah made her move. Using the house's landline, she called the number Elena had provided. The phone rang twice before a woman's voice answered, cautious and slightly weary. Hello. Is this Rebecca Chen? My name is Sarah Matthews. Elena Vasquez from Swedish Medical Center gave me your number. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the call had been disconnected. Sarah Matthews, Rebecca finally said. Marcus's current wife. Yes, Elena said you've been investigating Amanda's death. Are you safe to talk right now? Sarah glanced toward the basement door, listening for any sound of Marcus returning. I have maybe 10 minutes. Then listen carefully. Amanda called me 2 weeks before she died. She was terrified, said Marcus had been drugging her, that she'd found cameras throughout their house. She was planning to leave him, had contacted a lawyer, was preparing to expose everything. What happened to her? Official cause of death was accidental drowning. She supposedly fell off their boat while they were on a romantic weekend getaway to the San Juan Islands. But Amanda was a competitive swimmer in college. She wouldn't have drowned in calm water. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. Did you go to the police? Of course, but Marcus had documentation of Amanda's mental health issues. Hospital records showing she'd been treated for anxiety and depression. Witnesses who testified that she'd been acting erratically in the weeks before her death. Rebecca's voice turned bitter. He's very good at building a narrative. Elena said you've been gathering evidence. For 5 years, I've connected with 2 other women who were involved with Marcus before Amanda. Both reported similar patterns of surveillance and control. One managed to escape, but she was so psychologically damaged that she's never been able to testify. Sarah heard footsteps on the basement stairs. I have to go. How can I reach you? Don't. It's too dangerous if he's monitoring your communications. But Sarah, if you're pregnant, you need to know that Amanda was pregnant when she died. 6 months along. The line went dead just as Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway. Who are you talking to, sweetheart? My sister in Portland. She's been worried since she heard about my hospital visit. Marcus studied her face for a moment longer, then felt comfortable. How is Jennifer doing? Sarah's sister's name was Lisa, not Jennifer. It was a test, and Sarah forced herself to show no reaction. Oh, you know Jennifer. Always dramatic about everything. Marcus nodded, seemingly satisfied, but Sarah noticed he made a mental note to check the phone's call log later. That afternoon, while Marcus was supposedly at a business lunch, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Jennifer Walsh arrived unannounced, claiming she'd been in the neighborhood and wanted to check on Sarah after hearing about her medical emergency. "I hope you don't mind the impromptu visit," Jennifer said warmly as Sarah led her into the living room. "Elena Vasquez mentioned you'd had some complications." Sarah felt a flutter of hope. Elena had found a way to send help. "It was just premature contractions. Everything's fine now." Jennifer accepted tea and made pleasant conversation about the nursery, the weather, Sarah's architectural work. To any observer, it looked like a social call between friends, but Sarah noticed how Jennifer's eyes cataloged details of the house, the placement of cameras, the way Sarah glanced nervously toward the basement door. "Sarah, I want you to know that I'm available if you ever need someone to talk to. Pregnancy can be emotionally challenging, especially when there are other stressors in your life." The offer was carefully worded but unmistakable. "Thank you. I appreciate that more than you know." Jennifer left her business card with a handwritten note on the back. "Call anytime, day or night." That evening, Marcus announced his decision about their planned trip. "I've booked us a week at my place in the San Juan Islands," he said over dinner. "You need complete rest, away from all the stresses of city life. We'll leave this weekend." Sarah's blood turned to ice. The San Juan Islands, where Amanda had died. "Is that wise given my recent complications?" "I've spoken with Dr. Morrison. He thinks the sea air and quiet will be perfect for your recovery." Marcus reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Just the two of us. No distractions. Preparing for our daughter's arrival. What about my prenatal appointments? Dr. Morrison will come with us. He's looking forward to a working vacation." The trap was closing. Sarah realized she had perhaps 48 hours before Marcus took her to the place where he'd killed his first pregnant wife. That night, after Marcus had gone to sleep, Sarah lay awake making desperate plans. She couldn't simply disappear. Marcus would report her as a mentally unstable pregnant woman who posed a danger to herself and her unborn child. She needed evidence, witnesses, something that would expose Marcus's true nature before he could spin the narrative. The next morning, while Marcus was in his home gym, Sarah made a decision that terrified her. She was going to access the hidden room in the basement and gather proof of the surveillance system. The basement was Marcus's domain, filled with expensive wine, workout equipment, and what he claimed was a home theater system. Sarah had only been down there a handful of times during their marriage, and never without Marcus present. The door to the hidden room was concealed behind a false panel in the wine storage area. Sarah found the release mechanism, a combination lock hidden behind a vintage Bordeaux bottle. She tried their wedding anniversary, Amanda's birthday, which she'd looked up online, several other significant dates before hitting on Marcus's mother's birthday. The panel slid open silently, revealing a room that looked like something from a spy thriller. Multiple monitors covered one wall, showing live feeds from every camera in the house. Another wall was covered with hard drives, recording equipment, and servers that hummed quietly in the climate-controlled space. But the most disturbing discovery was the third wall covered with photographs. Pictures of Sarah sleeping, showering, changing clothes. Pictures of Amanda in similar situations. And photographs of at least 3 other women Sarah didn't recognize, all taken without their knowledge. But it was the filing cabinet that provided the most damning evidence. Inside, Sarah found detailed psychological profiles Marcus had compiled on each woman, including notes about their vulnerabilities, their family relationships, their financial situations. Amanda's file was thick, documenting her growing suspicions and her attempts to gather evidence against Marcus. The final entry in Amanda's file was dated 3 days before her death. Subject becoming too dangerous. Permanent solution required. Sarah photographed everything with the camera function on Elena's panic device, her hands shaking as she documented the evidence of Marcus's systematic psychological abuse and probable murder. As she prepared to leave the room, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of the basement door opening. Marcus was coming downstairs. Sarah quickly sealed the hidden room and moved to the wine storage area, grabbing a bottle at random as footsteps approached. "Sarah, what are you doing down here?" "Looking for that champagne you bought to celebrate when the baby comes," she said, holding up a bottle of Dom Perignon. "I thought it might be nice to save it in the nursery for afterward." Marcus studied her face, and Sarah saw suspicion warring with his desire to believe her story. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't be lifting heavy bottles in your condition. Let me help you back upstairs." As they walked toward the basement stairs, Sarah realized that her time had run out. Marcus knew she'd been in his sanctuary, and he would check the hidden room as soon as she was out of his sight. When he discovered that his secret files had been accessed, Sarah knew her life expectancy could be measured in hours, not days. She had to get help immediately, or she was going to become another accidental death that would be blamed on the instability of a pregnant woman who couldn't handle the pressures of impending motherhood. The panic button beneath her shirt had never felt more necessary, but Sarah also knew that pressing it would only bring help if she could survive long enough for that help to arrive. As she climbed the stairs ahead of Marcus, Sarah realized she was about to discover whether 5 years of planning and 2 decades of marriage had prepared her for the fight of her life. Marcus's behavior changed immediately after finding Sarah in the basement, where he had previously maintained the facade of the concerned husband. Now his mask began to slip with increasing frequency. "I think we should move up our departure date," he announced that evening over dinner. "Leave for the island tomorrow instead of this weekend." "Tomorrow? But I haven't packed. And don't you have that board meeting on Thursday?" "David can handle the meeting. Your health is more important than business." Marcus's smile was perfectly calibrated, but his eyes remained cold. "I've already called Dr. Morrison. He's cleared his schedule to accompany us." Sarah forced herself to eat, though every bite felt like swallowing stones. "What about the nursery contractor? He was supposed to finish the built-in shelving this week. We can deal with that when we return. If we return to this house at all." The casual way he mentioned not returning sent ice through Sarah's veins. "What do you mean?" "I was thinking we might want to relocate after the baby comes. Seattle has gotten so crowded, and the island property would be perfect for raising children. Much more private, isolated, cut off from help." That night, Sarah waited until Marcus's breathing had settled into the deep rhythm of sleep before carefully extracting herself from bed. Elena's panic device was hidden in her jewelry box, and Sarah activated it with 3 quick presses before returning to bed. She didn't have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Received your signal." "Are you in immediate danger?" Sarah carefully typed back. "Leaving for isolated location tomorrow. Need help before departure." "Address." Sarah provided their home address, then deleted the text thread and powered off her phone. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as Marcus prepared for their departure. Dr. Morrison arrived early, his medical bag in hand and his manner more subdued than Sarah had ever seen. "How are you feeling, Sarah?" he asked, but there was something forced about his concern. "Tired, anxious about traveling so soon after the contractions." "That's exactly why this getaway is perfect. Complete rest, no stress, no outside interference." Dr. Morrison exchanged a look with Marcus that Sarah pretended not to notice. As Marcus loaded their bags into his Range Rover, Sarah made her final desperate move. She slipped into his study and accessed his computer, which was still logged in from his morning emails. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Marcus had been researching boat accidents, specifically scenarios that could cause pregnant women to fall overboard. He'd also been corresponding with someone about insurance documentation and establishing timeline precedent. Most damning of all, she found a draft email to David dated for the following week. "Tragic accident on the water. Sarah's pregnancy complications led to disorientation and loss of balance. Despite heroic rescue attempts, both mother and child were lost. Suggest grief counseling and leave of absence from company duties." The email was scheduled to send automatically in 4 days, Sarah photographed the screen with Elena's device just as Marcus called from the garage. Sarah, time to go. Sweetheart. As they drove toward the marina where Marcus kept his yacht, Sarah realized that help might already be too late. The panic signal had been sent 12 hours ago, but no one had arrived to intervene. The marina was bustling with weekend boaters preparing for day trips in the sunshine. Marcus's yacht, Second Chance, sat in its premium slip looking like the picture of luxury and safety. Dr. Morrison had driven separately and was already aboard, checking what he claimed was emergency medical equipment in case Sarah went into labor again. All set, he announced as Marcus helped Sarah onto the boat. Everything we need for a safe, relaxing week. As they pulled away from the dock, Sarah watched Seattle's skyline recede with growing desperation. Cell service would disappear once they reached open water, and the San Juan Islands were remote enough that screams wouldn't carry to other boats. It was then that Sarah noticed the other boat. A Coast Guard vessel was maintaining a parallel course about a quarter-mile away, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid suspicion. Sarah's heart leaped with hope. Perhaps Elena's network had more resources than she'd realized. Marcus noticed the Coast Guard boat too, his jaw tightening with annoyance. Probably doing routine safety inspections, Dr. Morrison commented. They've been cracking down on boating violations lately. But the Coast Guard vessel continued to shadow them as they made their way through Puget Sound toward the islands. After an hour of parallel navigation, Marcus's radio crackled to life. Vessel Second Chance, this is Coast Guard Cutter Vigilant. Please prepare for routine safety inspection. Marcus cursed under his breath but slowed the yacht and prepared to receive the boarding party. Within minutes, 2 Coast Guard officers were on deck, their presence transforming the atmosphere aboard the yacht. Routine inspection, folks, the senior officer announced. We'll try to make this as quick as possible. But Sarah noticed the officer's attention focused more on her than on the boat's safety equipment. When one of them asked to speak with her privately, Marcus immediately objected. My wife is 7 months pregnant and has been having complications. Any stress could trigger premature labor. This will just take a moment. Sir, the officer's tone was polite but firm. Mrs. Matthews, could you step into the cabin with me? In the privacy of the yacht's main cabin, the officer introduced himself as Petty Officer James Walsh, Dr. Jennifer Walsh's brother. Sarah realized, Ma'am, we received a distress signal from a device registered to you. Are you in immediate danger? Sarah glanced toward the cabin door, where she could hear Marcus and Dr. Morrison speaking in low, urgent tones with the other officer. My husband is planning to kill me, she said quietly, the same way he killed his first wife 5 years ago. Petty Officer Walsh nodded gravely. We're aware of the situation. We need to get you off this boat safely, but we have to be careful not to spook them into doing something desperate. How much do you know? Enough. Dr. Vasquez has been building a case with the FBI. Your husband's surveillance activities cross state lines, which makes it a federal matter. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Morrison appearing in the cabin doorway. Is everything all right? Sarah's pregnancy complications make extended questioning dangerous. Just finishing up, sir. Petty Officer Walsh turned back to Sarah. Mrs. Matthews, we're going to need you to come with us for a more detailed inspection of your medical condition. That's completely unnecessary, Marcus interjected from behind Dr. Morrison. Her doctor is right here. But Petty Officer Walsh was already helping Sarah toward the deck. Sir, when there are pregnancy complications on the water, Coast Guard protocol requires immediate medical evaluation at the nearest facility. Marcus's composure finally cracked. Sarah saw the calculation in his eyes as he weighed his options. Let her go with the Coast Guard and risk exposure, or refuse and confirm their suspicions. You can't take my wife, he said, his voice carrying an edge of desperation Sarah had never heard before. She's not mentally stable. She's been having episodes, paranoid delusions about surveillance, and threats that don't exist. All the more reason for professional evaluation, the other Coast Guard officer replied. As Sarah was helped onto the Coast Guard vessel, She saw Dr. Morrison reaching for his medical bag with movements that looked more threatening than helpful. Marcus made his final play, lunging towards Sarah with claims that she was having a psychotic break and trying to harm her unborn child. It was then that Rebecca Chen stepped onto the deck of the Coast Guard vessel. "Hello, Marcus," Amanda's sister said calmly. "I think it's time we talked about what really happened to my sister." The look of pure rage that crossed Marcus's face in that moment was captured by multiple cameras and would later become key evidence in his prosecution. But more importantly, Sarah was finally safe. As the Coast Guard vessel headed back towards Seattle with Sarah in protective custody, she watched Marcus's yacht being escorted by two more Coast Guard cutters. The man who had controlled every aspect of her life for 2 years was finally the one trapped, surrounded, and facing the consequences of his actions. For the first time in months, Sarah could breathe freely. The Coast Guard medical facility in Seattle was a stark contrast to the luxuries Sarah had grown accustomed to, but she had never felt safer in her life. Elena Vasquez was waiting when they brought Sarah in, along with Dr. Jennifer Walsh and a woman who introduced herself as FBI Special Agent Maria Santos. "First things first," Elena said, immediately taking charge of Sarah's medical care. "We need to make sure you and the baby are stable. Then we'll deal with everything else." The examination revealed that Sarah was in better physical condition than expected, though blood tests confirmed what they already suspected. She had been systematically drugged with benzodiazepines for months. "The dosages were carefully calculated," Dr. Walsh explained as she reviewed the lab results. "Enough to cause disorientation and memory issues, but not enough to obviously impair your daily functioning. Very sophisticated psychological manipulation." Agent Santos pulled up a chair beside Sarah's bed. "Mrs. Matthews, I need to debrief you while everything is fresh in your memory. We've been investigating your husband for over a year, but we needed someone on the inside to provide evidence." "A year? How did you know Rebecca Chen never stopped investigating her sister's death?" "She eventually brought her concerns to us, and we began looking into Marcus's pattern of behavior. When Elena Vasquez contacted us about your situation, the pieces started falling into place." Over the next several hours, Sarah provided a detailed account of everything she had observed and documented: the hidden cameras, the financial manipulation, the medical gaslighting, the evidence she'd photographed in Marcus's secret room. "The files you accessed in his basement are crucial," Agent Santos explained. "We've obtained warrants to search the property, and what we're finding corroborates everything you've told us." Rebecca Chen joined them as the day wore on, sharing 5 years of research into Marcus's background. "Amanda wasn't his first victim, just the first one who died," Rebecca explained. "We've identified at least 6 women over the past 15 years who experienced similar patterns of surveillance and control. Most were too psychologically damaged to come forward, but they're talking now." "What happens next?" Sarah asked. "Marcus and Dr. Morrison are in federal custody," Agent Santos said. "The charges include domestic surveillance, assault, conspiracy to commit murder, and financial fraud. Dr. Morrison has been cooperating in exchange for a reduced sentence." Dr. Morrison's confession had revealed the full scope of Marcus's operation. The prenatal vitamins had been specially compounded with sedatives. The hospital visits Sarah couldn't remember had been orchestrated to build a medical history of mental instability. Even some of her architectural clients had been contacted with false reports about her reliability and competence. "The level of premeditation is staggering," Agent Santos continued. "He spent 2 years systematically destroying your credibility and independence, preparing for the moment when he could eliminate you without suspicion." Elena monitored Sarah's stress levels throughout the debriefing, ensuring that the psychological trauma didn't trigger premature labor. "You need to understand that what you've survived is extraordinary," she told Sarah. "Most women in your situation don't escape." As evening approached, Sarah was transferred to a secure wing of Swedish Medical Center for continued monitoring. The hospital room felt like a palace after months of feeling trapped in her own home. That night, Sarah's sister Lisa arrived from Portland, followed by her parents from San Francisco. Jessica came straight from the airport after cutting short a business trip to San Diego. "I knew something was wrong," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. "I should have pushed harder when you seemed to pull away from everyone." "He was very good at making it seem like my choice," Sarah replied. "That was the point." The media attention began almost immediately. Marcus Chen's arrest made national news, with headlines describing the tech mogul's house of horrors and the Millionaire's surveillance scandal. Sarah's story resonated with women across the country who had experienced similar patterns of control and manipulation. But the public attention also brought unexpected revelations. 3 more women contacted the FBI with stories about Marcus. One had been his college girlfriend, another a business associate he had briefly dated. Each described similar experiences: the gradual isolation, the technological surveillance, the psychological manipulation that made them question their own perceptions. Most shocking was the testimony of Diana Reeves, Marcus's girlfriend immediately before Amanda. Diana had escaped the relationship but had been too traumatized to speak publicly for years. "He kept detailed files on all of us," Diana revealed during a video interview with Agent Santos. "Psychological profiles, strategies for control, even practiced scenarios for making our deaths look accidental." The evidence continued mounting as FBI technicians dismantled Marcus's surveillance network. The basement room Sarah had discovered was just the beginning. Marcus had maintained surveillance on multiple properties, tracking not just his current victims, but also women he had previously targeted. A week after her rescue, Sarah received news that would change everything again. "We found Amanda's real medical records," Agent Santos announced during one of their regular briefings. "The pregnancy complications that Marcus claimed led to her erratic behavior. They never existed. Amanda was completely healthy until the week she died." "What about the hospital visits he documented? Fabricated. Dr. Morrison created false medical records for Amanda, just like he did for you. We believe Marcus was planning to use these records to explain her accidental death as the result of pregnancy-induced mental illness." The pattern was becoming clear. Marcus had perfected his method over years, learning from each relationship how to better control and ultimately eliminate his victims. But there was one crucial difference this time. "You fought back," Elena told Sarah during one of her medical checkups. "Every other woman Marcus targeted was completely isolated by the time he made his move. But you found ways to gather evidence, to reach out for help, to document what was happening to you." Sarah's architectural training had served her well. She approached the problem of escaping abuse the same way she approached designing a building methodically, with multiple backup systems and careful attention to structural integrity. The panic device Elena had provided became the cornerstone of a support network that ultimately saved Sarah's life. But it was Sarah's own determination to document everything, to question her reality even when Marcus was systematically undermining it, that provided the evidence needed to stop him. 2 weeks after her rescue, as Sarah sat in her secure hospital room, watching the Seattle skyline through bulletproof glass, she realized that she had not only survived Marcus's elaborate plan to kill her, she had systematically dismantled it. The woman who had felt powerless and trapped just months before had become the architect of her own liberation. And now, with her daughter kicking strongly in her womb and a future that was finally her own to design, Sarah began planning the next phase of her life, helping other women escape the same trap she had survived. 3 months later, Sarah sat in the federal courthouse in Seattle, her 2-month-old daughter Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms. The baby had been born healthy and full term, delivered at Swedish Medical Center, surrounded by the support network that had saved both their lives. Marcus's trial had become a media sensation, drawing national attention to the intersection of domestic abuse and digital surveillance. Sarah's testimony had been the centerpiece of the prosecution's case, but she was no longer the terrified woman who had discovered hidden cameras in her bathroom mirror. Motherhood had transformed her in ways she hadn't expected. The fierce protectiveness she felt toward Hope extended to all the women who had suffered under Marcus's systematic abuse. "Mrs. Matthews," the prosecutor began, "can you describe for the jury the moment you realized your husband was surveilling you?" Sarah's voice was steady as she recounted the discovery of the hidden camera, the gradual realization of the scope of Marcus's surveillance network, the mounting evidence of his plan to kill her. He made me question my own reality, Sarah testified. Every day, I wondered if I was losing my mind or if what I was experiencing was real. That's the insidious nature of this kind of abuse. It makes you doubt yourself even when you have evidence right in front of you. Marcus sat at the defense table, his expensive suit and composed demeanor intact. Even now, facing life in prison, he maintained the facade of the successful businessman wrongly accused by an unstable wife. His defense attorney had built their case around Sarah's supposed mental health issues, using the false medical records Dr. Morrison had created to paint her as an unreliable witness, suffering from pregnancy-induced psychosis. But the prosecution had evidence that went far beyond Sarah's testimony. Rebecca Chen took the stand to describe her sister Amanda's final weeks. The phone calls full of terror, the plans to escape that had been cut short by death. Diana Reeves testified via video link about her own escape from Marcus's surveillance network, providing crucial corroboration of his methods. The FBI's technical expert walked the jury through the elaborate surveillance system, explaining how Marcus had monitored not just his current victims, but multiple women simultaneously. Most damning of all were Marcus's own files, the detailed psychological profiles and elimination strategies he had compiled over years of predatory behavior. The defendant maintained what can only be described as a murder manual. The prosecutor explained to the jury detailed instructions for how to isolate, control, and ultimately eliminate women who threatened to expose his activities. Dr. Morrison had pled guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for his testimony against Marcus. His explanation of the medical gaslighting, the false hospital visits, the drugged vitamins, the fabricated psychiatric evaluations, provided crucial insight into Marcus's methods. He was incredibly meticulous, Dr. Morrison testified. Every aspect of the plan was designed to make the victim appear mentally unstable, while positioning Marcus as the long-suffering husband trying to help his sick wife. The defense's argument crumbled under the weight of evidence. Marcus's carefully constructed image as a loving husband and successful businessman couldn't withstand scrutiny when the full scope of his surveillance network was revealed. On the fourth day of testimony, Agent Santos presented the most shocking evidence. Marcus had been planning to kill Sarah during their island trip, but he had already begun grooming his next victim. "We found communications with a woman in Portland," Agent Santos testified, a recently divorced architect who had attracted the defendant's attention through professional networking events. The pattern was already beginning: excessive interest in her work, offers of business collaboration, subtle questioning about her personal life and security arrangements. Sarah felt sick as she realized how close another woman had come to falling into Marcus's trap. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Marcus showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but Sarah saw his hands clench briefly before he regained control. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. Sarah had debated whether to provide a victim impact statement, but ultimately decided that her voice needed to be heard. "Your Honor," she began, standing at the podium with hope in her arms. "Marcus Chen didn't just try to kill me. He tried to erase me. For 2 years, he systematically destroyed my sense of reality, my professional relationships, my connections to friends and family. He made me doubt my own perceptions, my own memories, my own worth." Sarah paused, looking directly at Marcus for the first time since the trial began. But he underestimated something crucial. He thought that by isolating me, by making me dependent on him, he could control the narrative of my life and death. What he didn't count on was the network of women who refused to let another woman disappear without a fight. She turned back to the judge. "Elena Vasquez, who recognized the signs of abuse and provided the tools for my escape. Rebecca Chen, who never stopped investigating her sister's death. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who risked her professional reputation to help a woman she barely knew. These women, and many others, proved that Marcus's greatest weakness was his inability to understand the power of women supporting women. The judge sentenced Marcus to life in prison without the possibility of parole, with additional consecutive sentences for the surveillance crimes and conspiracy charges. As Sarah left the courthouse, surrounded by the media attention that had made her story a national conversation about domestic abuse and digital privacy, she reflected on how completely her life had changed. The architectural firm she had founded was thriving, with a specialty in designing secure facilities for domestic abuse survivors. The Harmony House project that Marcus had sabotaged was back on track, with Sarah's revolutionary trauma-informed design approach gaining national recognition. More importantly, Sarah had become an advocate for other survivors, using her platform to educate women about the warning signs of digital domestic abuse and the resources available for escape. The Sarah Matthews Foundation, established with the settlement money from Marcus's seized assets, provided emergency assistance to women trying to leave abusive relationships, along with funding for research into the intersection of technology and domestic violence. But perhaps the most significant change was personal. Elena Vasquez had left nursing to become a full-time victim advocate, and over the months of working together on Sarah's case, their professional relationship had evolved into something deeper. "I never thought I'd be able to trust again," Sarah told Elena one evening as they watched Hope play in the secure apartment that had become Sarah's temporary home during the trial. "Trust is earned," Elena replied, "and it takes time to rebuild after someone has systematically destroyed it." Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to helping other women escape the kind of trap Sarah had survived. 6 months after Marcus's conviction, Elena moved in with Sarah and Hope. Their home was equipped with security systems Sarah had designed herself, technology used for protection rather than surveillance, with full transparency about what was monitored and why. "It feels like a different world," Sarah said one morning, watching Elena make breakfast while Hope giggled in her high chair. "Not just because Marcus is gone, but because I finally understand what healthy love looks like." Elena smiled, the expression Sarah had come to treasure for its complete genuineness. "You saved yourself. You know, all those women who helped you. We just provided tools and support. But the courage to use them, the determination to fight back, the intelligence to gather evidence, that was all you." As Sarah prepared to leave for another speaking engagement about domestic abuse prevention, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from victim to survivor to advocate. Marcus had tried to erase her, but instead, he had accidentally created something much more powerful: a woman who understood her own worth and refused to let anyone diminish it. The bruise that had started everything was long healed, but the strength it had revealed would last forever. 2 years after Marcus's conviction, Sarah stood in the lobby of the newly completed Harmony House, watching as the first residents moved into their secure apartments. The building incorporated everything she had learned about safety, both from her professional expertise and her personal experience with surveillance and control. Each unit had multiple exit routes, communication systems that couldn't be monitored by unauthorized parties, and design elements that promoted healing rather than institutional living. The children's play area was visible from every apartment window, ensuring that mothers could always keep their kids in sight while still allowing the children space to be children. "It's beautiful," Elena said, joining Sarah with 2 cups of coffee. Hope, now an active 2-year-old, was playing in the secured garden area under the watchful eye of one of the facility's childcare specialists. "More than that, it's safe," Sarah replied. "Every woman who walks through these doors will know that someone understood what she's been through." The Sarah Matthews Foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations. In addition to funding secure housing for domestic abuse survivors, the foundation had established a technology safety program that taught women how to protect their digital privacy and detect surveillance equipment. Sarah's story had inspired legislative changes in multiple states, with new laws addressing digital stalking and surveillance abuse. The Sarah Matthews Act in Washington state specifically criminalized the use of hidden surveillance equipment to monitor intimate partners without consent. But the work that meant the most to Sarah was direct service to survivors. Mrs. Matthews A young woman approached hesitantly, holding the hand of a little girl who looked to be about Hope's age. "I'm Jennifer Torres. We spoke on the phone about the apartment." Sarah immediately recognized the signs she knew so well, the careful way Jennifer scanned the room, the protective positioning between her daughter and potential threats, the hypervigilance that came from months or years of living in danger. "Jennifer, I'm so glad you're here. Let me show you around." As they toured Jennifer's new apartment, Sarah shared practical safety information alongside the emotional support that could only come from someone who had survived similar experiences. "The important thing to remember is that your instincts are good," Sarah explained as they checked the multiple lock systems on the apartment door. "If something feels wrong, trust that feeling. You've been trained by survival to recognize danger." Jennifer nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I still wake up some nights thinking he's found me." "That's normal. It takes time for your nervous system to understand that you're safe now." Sarah's voice carried the authority of lived experience. "But you are safe, and you're not alone." Later that evening, as Sarah, Elena, and Hope sat in their own living room reading bedtime stories, Sarah reflected on how different her life looked from what she had imagined 2 years earlier. The Seattle skyline was visible from their apartment windows, but now Sarah saw it as a symbol of possibility rather than a prison view. Their home was secure but not surveilled, private but not isolated. Elena had proven to be the partner Sarah never thought she could trust again. Their relationship was built on transparency, mutual support, and a shared commitment to the work that had brought them together. "Mama, more story," Hope demanded, holding up her favorite book about a brave princess who saved herself. "One more chapter," Sarah agreed, settling Hope more comfortably in her lap. As she read about the princess's adventures, Sarah was aware of Elena's presence beside her, the security of their home around them, and the community of survivors they had helped build. Her phone buzzed with a text message, but unlike the months when every communication had carried the threat of Marcus's surveillance, now Sarah felt no anxiety about checking her messages. It was from Rebecca Chen. "Amanda's Memorial Garden dedication is next month. Would you speak at the ceremony?" Sarah showed the message to Elena, who squeezed her hand supportively. "I'd like to," Sarah said. "Amanda deserves to be remembered for who she was, not just how she died." The memorial garden was being established on the grounds of a new women's shelter in Portland, funded partly by the Sarah Matthews Foundation and partly by donations from survivors and advocates across the country. "You know what I think Amanda would be proudest of?" Elena said thoughtfully. "What? That her death wasn't in vain, that it helped save other women's lives." The next morning brought news that would have terrified Sarah 2 years earlier, but now filled her with fierce determination. Agent Santos called to inform her that Marcus was attempting to file an appeal of his conviction, claiming that his rights had been violated during the investigation. "It's a long shot," Agent Santos assured her. "His legal team is grasping at straws, but I wanted you to know in case it generates media attention." Sarah thanked her and hung up, feeling Elena's concerned gaze. "He's trying to appeal," Sarah explained. "Are you worried?" Sarah considered the question seriously. 2 years ago, the mere mention of Marcus's name would have sent her into a panic spiral. Now, she felt angry but not afraid. "No," she said with certainty. "He's already lost everything that mattered to him, his freedom, his reputation, his ability to hurt other women. This is just desperation." That afternoon, Sarah received a call that reminded her why her work mattered. "Mrs. Matthews, this is Detective Laura Kim with Portland Police. We have a woman here who says she knows you, that you might be able to help her." The woman's name was Maria Santos, and her story was heartbreakingly familiar. A successful marketing executive married to a wealthy tech entrepreneur who had been systematically surveilling and isolating her. Maria had finally found the courage to run when she discovered her husband had been drugging her food. "She specifically asked for you," Detective Kim explained. "Said she read about your case and realized her situation was similar." Sarah drove to Portland that same day, bringing Elena and Hope with her. They met Maria at a secure location, where Sarah provided the kind of support she wished had been available to her during her darkest moments. "You're not crazy," Sarah told Maria firmly. "What you're experiencing is real. It's deliberate, and it's not your fault." Over the following weeks, Sarah worked with Maria's legal team to document the surveillance and abuse, using the knowledge she had gained from her own case to help build a stronger prosecution. Maria's husband was arrested before he could escalate to physical violence, becoming the seventh man prosecuted under laws that Sarah's advocacy had helped strengthen. "Each case gets easier," Sarah told Elena after Maria's husband pled guilty to avoid trial. "Not because the trauma is less, but because we're getting better at recognizing the patterns and building the support systems." On Hope's third birthday, Sarah received a letter that would stay with her forever. It was from a college student named Emma, who had recognized the warning signs of digital stalking in her relationship because of Sarah's advocacy work. "I left before it escalated," Emma wrote, "because I knew what to look for. Your story saved my life, and I wanted you to know that." That evening, as Sarah and Elena tucked Hope into bed in their secure, loving home, Sarah felt the deep satisfaction that came from turning survival into service. "Mama," Hope asked sleepily, "why do you help the scared ladies?" Sarah considered how to explain her work to a 3-year-old. "Because everyone deserves to feel safe in their home," she said simply. "And sometimes people need help remembering how strong they are. Like the princess in our story, exactly like the princess in our story." As Hope drifted off to sleep, Sarah stood at the window looking out at Seattle's lights. Somewhere in the city, there were women living in fear, questioning their own perceptions, feeling trapped by partners who used love as a weapon. But there were also resources now that hadn't existed when Sarah was fighting for her life. Shelters designed by architects who understood trauma, legal advocates trained in digital abuse, support networks that recognize surveillance as violence. Sarah's phone buzzed with one final message of the day. This one from a woman in Chicago who had just left an abusive relationship and needed help starting over. "I'm ready to fight back," the message read. "Can you help me learn how?" Sarah smiled and typed back, "Yes, and you're not alone." The bruise that had revealed Marcus's surveillance was long gone, but the strength it had awakened in Sarah continued to ripple outward, touching lives she would never know and preventing tragedies that would never happen. In the end, Marcus's greatest failure hadn't been underestimating Sarah's intelligence or resourcefulness. It had been failing to understand that some things, once broken, grow back stronger, and some women, once awakened to their own power, never go back to sleep. As Sarah finally headed to bed, joining Elena in the home they had built together on a foundation of honesty, respect, and mutual support, she felt the deep peace that came from a life aligned with purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new survivors to support, new systems to build. But tonight, Sarah Matthews Chen Vasquez was exactly where she belonged, safe, loved, and using her voice to ensure that other women could find their way to the same freedom. The story that had begun with a bruise and a hidden camera had become something Marcus never could have anticipated, a testament to the power of women refusing to disappear quietly. And in the secure nursery down the hall, Hope slept soundly, growing up in a world made safer by her mother's courage and the community of survivors who had refused to let another woman's story end in silence.